Okay, so let's start with a fresh analog. I'm just going to pull the default device over here onto this track, and then let's take a look. Okay, so we know our way around a little bit, right? We already kind of know our oscillator section, our filter section, and our amplifier section, but there's more here. Things we don't know are things like the LFOs, we'll talk about those. Also, how the different oscillators interact with each other, right? So we have two oscillators, kind of three actually. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but the number of oscillators an instrument has, or any synth has, is one of the things that makes different synths unique to each other. Some synthesizers just have one oscillator in their oscillator section. Some have two, like this one. Even though this sort of has three, I'll talk about that in a minute. Some have four, like operator that we're going to look at soon. Some have 100, right? Most of them have between two and four, but there are some that have just like insane numbers of oscillators. So one other thing that is common in a lot of the Ableton instruments is that as you click on a section, you're going to get more controls down here. This whole black box is unique to whatever you just clicked on, right? So if I click on oscillator section, this is all related to that oscillator section. If I go to filter section, this stuff is all related to that filter. Amplifier, LFO even, right? You see it's all grayed out here because that LFO is off. Okay, so let's walk through our signal flow of analog because it's a little complicated. And then we'll focus on these LFOs for a little bit, and then we'll make some stuff. Okay, let's take a look at the signal flow within this synthesizer. Okay, this will help you really understand how to use it by kind of analyzing the signal flow. Now, most synthesizers give you some kind of clue as to what the signal flow is. And a lot of the time it's in the design, especially when you get into analog synthesizers. Um, some of the design elements will kind of point you into how the signal is flowing. Like in this synth over here, it's got all these like design elements that are actually, once you kind of stare at it for a while, seeing that they're like arrows that are showing you like this goes that way and this goes that way. But this one doesn't have that, although things generally flow from left to right. However, they can take some turns along the way. Okay, so if we turn everything off on the bottom row, what we have here is just our oscillator. Oscillator 1 is going to go to filter 1, which is going to go to amplifier, and then out. Okay? However, it's a little more complicated than that. There's a couple points where things can kind of diverge. The first one is right here. Filter 1, filter 2. So here we're saying, where do we want this oscillator's sound to go? Right now it's set to filter 1, which is here. Easy enough. But I could change this to say like 50-50. Now it's going to filter 1 and filter 2. So half the signal is going here and half the signal is going there. Why would I want to do that? I could set two different filters that way. I could say this filter has a whole bunch of resonance and a pretty high cutoff frequency, whereas this filter has a lower cutoff frequency and maybe less resonance. Maybe this is a different shape of filter. There's a lot of different things I can do with that. So here we're just kind of splitting the signal and sending it to two different places. Now, if I do that though, I need to turn on amp 2 because otherwise the percentage, half the signal that's down here into filter 2 is just dying when it gets to here. It's not going anywhere. So I got to turn this on if I want to hear that. Okay, so filter 1, filter 2. I can do it on this oscillator too. So I could say this one is going to go all to filter 1 or all to filter 2. And you might be thinking, could I just make this one filter 1 and this one filter 2 so that they roll right across from left to right? You totally can do that. And that's a perfectly good way to use this instrument. But if I did this, now both oscillator 1 and 2 are going to filter 1 and then to filter 2, half of their signal each. So you're going to get a slightly different sound that way. So let's keep it simple. Let's go filter 1 and filter 2 down here. Okay, now there's another point where things kind of can diverge if we want them to, and that's right here. This says to filter 2. What percentage do we want to go to filter 2? That means that if I take this signal, this is all going to filter 1, so it's all going here. After it goes to filter 1, it's all 100% being sent down to filter 2 anyway. But that's different, right? That's different than the signal going from here, half to filter 1 and half to filter 2. This says all of this signal is going to go to filter 1, and it's going to be filtered by filter 1. All of these settings are going to apply to it. And then the result is going to go out and down to filter 2. Make sense? And then filter 2 is going to send it over to amp 2, and then we'll hear it. We can't send filter 2 up to filter 1. So that's our signal flow. We've got these kind of 1, 2, 3 points where we can kind of interrupt the signal flow and send it around the synthesizer in different ways. All of that's going to change the sound. We'll look at some examples of that soon when we look at a few presets or maybe design something of our own. After we get to the amplifier, we're going to go right out. We're going to hit this volume knob for one more kind of main volume adjustment and then send out, which out obviously means back to the track. It's going to hit this meter and then our main meter. And that's our signal flow. Okay, let's talk about this LFO. LFO, I always debate whether or not I should include this in my 4 sections of the synthesizer, because just about every synthesizer I've ever seen has an LFO in it. But I usually leave it off just to keep things simple. But it is a very, very, very common thing that you're going to find. So let's learn how to use it. Okay, our LFO is right here. First of all, what does that stand for? LFO is low frequency oscillator. Okay, so let's analyze that. It is an oscillator, right? There's an O in it. That stands for oscillator. So these are oscillators. They're our only sound generating thing. So how can that be that these oscillators are sound generating things, but these ones aren't? Well, these ones are low frequency oscillators. They are too low for us to hear. They're very low, like under 20 hertz. Like we can hear down to 20 hertz-ish. These are usually between 0 and maybe 10 hertz. You can see the typical rates here. They go up to 17 hertz, I guess, is the fastest that it goes. So it's too low for you to hear. You're not going to hear them. So what's the point? We're not even going to route these to an audio output. We're not even going to try to hear them. There's no point in hearing them. So what can they do? Well, remember what oscillators do. They oscillate, right? They go back and forth. Or if you're like a sine wave, they go like this. And they just do that forever. They're just like a fish swimming forever. It's never going to stop. It's just going to do this forever. So our idea here is, wouldn't it be cool if we could take this and assign it to something? Like what if we wanted our volume our main volume, let's say, no, our oscillator volume, like what if we just wanted like our oscillator volume right here just to constantly be going up and down and up and down and up and down to create motion. Motion is one of the main things we can control in a sound. So if we could just have this go up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down forever, that might give us some cool motion. So we can use one of these low frequency oscillators and take that sine wave that's on it, or it can be any kind of wave, and say, okay, you that are just doing this forever, I'm just going to connect you to my volume, and then you're going to go up and down like this forever. Make sense? Let's try it. Okay, so here's the sound. I'm going to turn on this LFO. Okay? Now, so this LFO is on. We'll play with these settings in a minute, but let's go back over here. So I'm going to go over to the amplifier and control this volume instead of this one. So this one, I'm going to go here. I'm going to go to level modulation, is what mod stands for here. LFO1. Let's crank that up. Okay, now when I play that note, there it is. There's our sine wave going. It's going a little faster than I can go. But that's what it's doing. If I turn that down, okay, you can think of this amount that I'm dialing in right here as like, if I'm telling the volume to go 0 to 100, right? That would be this all the way up. It's going, it's actually going, but if I say like 50, it's actually not going to go 0 to 100. It's more going to go like 25 to 75. It's going to look a narrower window. Okay, so right, it's not going all the way down or all the way up. It's just kind of sitting more in the middle. And as I like pull that number down, it's going to move less and less and less. It does not have anything to do with the speed. If I want to adjust the speed, that is the rate out here. Okay, so in my LFO settings, I have these two little buttons here, hertz, and then what looks like a little note. That is common. You'll see that in a lot of different settings. So hertz means like I can dial this in based on the frequency. So 1.2 hertz, that is a certain speed of LFO. That's cool. If I don't want to deal with hertz, I can deal with this, which is actually just division of the beat. Okay, this is usually more useful, at least in the way that I work. So here, I can say now it's at a quarter note. Okay, so let's crank this back up. Okay, so now the pulsing that I'm getting is a quarter note because it says quarter there. I can switch it to an eighth note. It is. Now it's an eighth note. Okay, so we can control things that way. Now, this nomenclature here, quarter is quarter note, eighth is eighth note. When you see a T or a D after these, D means dotted eighth note. That's going to be a little slower than an eighth note. And T means eighth note triplet, or whatever you're looking at. Here's eighth note triplet. That's going to be a little faster than an eighth note. So you might be thinking, oh, this sounds like a way to get those big wub-wub sounds by just going like doing a really low sound like that. It is kind of one way to get those big wub-wub sounds. There's other ways that we'll look at later. But yeah, this is one way that they get those. It's with an LFO. Okay, so in order to use an LFO, we have to turn on the LFO. We adjust the rate, which is the speed of it, and then we assign it to something. So far, we've assigned it to an amplifier, but there's tons of other things we can assign it to. We can assign it to panning. Okay. Now it's volume and panning. Let's turn off volume. Okay, now it's panning. I could go into my oscillator and say pitch. Okay, now the pitch is going to go up and down like crazy. And what's interesting is that you still hear a frequency, right, happening underneath that. A quiet frequency that's just staying steady. You hear that? That's this other oscillator. So I've only turned on the LFO for one oscillator. Okay, this is really annoying, so let's turn that off. I can do filter stuff. I can say frequency modulation with the filter. Crank that up. Now my filter's going all up and down like crazy. So let's do that not so crazy. Okay, now we can hear the panning and the filter are both being affected by the LFO. Okay. Now, if I want to make a more complex one, let's turn on a second LFO. Let's set it to dotted 16th note and put that one down here on pitch mod just a little bit, just to give us a little vibrato feel. We'll also put it on this filter kind of a lot. Now we're going to have a pretty complex sound. Okay, let's put it on panning here. Okay, we've got a ton of motion happening in this sound now, right? So we've really achieved that motion that I like in sounds. Not all sounds need to have motion, but it's a nice thing to add sometimes. So that is what the LFO does. Okay, we can turn them back off like this, and now we're just back to where we were. Cool. All right, let's make a patch in analog. So typically when we put something together, we call it a patch. I don't know why. It kind of has to do with probably like analog where you're like actually moving patch cables around, but we still like to call it a patch even though we're just dialing something in. So let's go back to our default patch, okay? So I'm just gonna load an analog back up onto the same track. You can drag it right on top of your existing analog, okay? That's gonna take us back to our default patch. Now, maybe I should point out here that you can change the default patch if you want. I wouldn't really recommend doing this, but if you really want to, if you dial in a patch and you're like, that's me, that's what I want like my default patch to be going forward, all you have to do is save that patch with this little save button and then kind of control click on the header of your analog and say save as default preset. But we're not gonna do that right now. I will talk about saving and sharing patches in just a minute. But okay, so we have a default patch. Sounds like this. Okay. What do we want? What do we want to make? Let's make a pad sound, okay? So pad sounds are those like slowly evolving sounds. They've got a lot of motion in them usually, but they're very delicate. They're not real bright. They can be bright. But slow attack, slow release, all that stuff. So let's start there, actually. So let's go to our amplitude amplifier and just say we want slow attack and a slow release. Let's hear that. Maybe a little slower on the attack. pretty good. I kind of like, like in full honesty, like a big kind of confession is that I really like the default analog sound, especially like in a fifth like that. I just really like that sound. I think it's just gritty and nice. But let's change it. So let's go to our oscillator section. Okay, if we want a calmer sound, we could switch over to a sine wave. We could leave this one sawtooth. Doesn't feel like it's changing everything a whole bunch. Let's do both sine waves. It's not bad, but it's a little too clean. Let's go back to this. I kind of like that. Okay, let's set our filter up. Well, actually, before we set up our filter, there is one thing we can do that'll make this sound a lot thicker. It already sounds pretty thick because of that sawtooth wave, but let's go to 2 sine waves. So right now I have 2 sine waves doing the same thing. Okay? They can go to different filters, but the tuning is the same on them. One thing I could do here is maybe I'll take this one and tune it down by an octave. Now listen. So now we have a whole different kind of sound, right? It's almost like an organ. I can even do a little bit more if I changed the tuning of it. If you pull one oscillator out of tune just a little bit, you'll get this density to the sound. It makes it really thick. Now it's not so obvious when we separate it by octaves. So let's go up to the same octave. So now we have that, but watch this. Right? It kind of creates its own little LFO just from the notes being just like a little out of tune. They're kind of doing this. So that can be a good sound, but I don't think I need it here because I liked the octave difference better. Okay, let's leave that out of tune just a hair. Okay. Okay, so now what are we doing with our filters? This one's going over to filter 1. This one's going over to filter 1. Okay. And then we're going all to filter 2 afterwards. So let's tighten up our filter, a little bit of resonance. Let's go up an octave here. There's that resonance. Okay, let's turn on this filter. Add a little bit more resonance in a different spot. That's nice. I'm going to play with those filters with an envelope in just a second. Okay, and let's go to amplifier 2 out and just leave our level just like that. Okay, so I'm getting a weird click there. I think it's from this other filter. We'll deal with that in a minute. Okay, let's add an LFO and just create a little bit of motion on this. So let's do it with our filter. Let's add some frequency modulation. This one too. a little bit, turn both of them on. I don't really care about the beat, division of the beat right now. I just want kind of a slow ambience here. Okay. Okay, here's where that click is coming from. I didn't set an envelope, an amplitude envelope for my second amplifier. Okay, let's turn these down a little bit. Okay, now let's add a little envelope to my filter. Okay, let's turn this down a little bit. All right, so it's actually not a bad pad sound now. Oh. Let's try that again. Let's make a little MIDI clip so that we just have a... Okay, I don't really love that LFO, but without it... we have a pretty good sound. It's quite simple and nice. Okay, throughout this course, I want to be able to give you these patches that we make. So let me just show you how you save and share a patch. So this works the same, I believe, for all instruments. What you need to find is this little disc icon right there. So I'm going to hit save, and as soon as I click that little disc icon, it jumps me in my browser over to user library and then is prompting me to give this a name. So let's call this sine pad. Okay, and it's going to automatically attach ADV, Ableton device, to it. Okay, so now this is my patch. Forever, I can load this up as a patch that I made. Neat. Sometimes people do stuff like abbreviate it with their name. So I can click Command R to rename this, and I could say like J sine pad if I wanted to, just to know that like this is what I made. But I don't actually really care about that. So I'm gonna get rid of that. Okay, great. Now, if I want to find where this is on my computer, because this is an actual file now, this little sine pad ADV, if I want to find this and send it to you, I can control click and say show in Finder, and here it is. This appears to be another one I've made, massive bass synth. Maybe we'll load that one up in a minute. So I will post this in the class, and you can download it. And once you get it on your computer, if you just drag it over into your Finder, it should take it. You can kind of see where it's willing to put it. Any of my collections, and then my user library. My user library, if it's in my user library, it will show up in synth presets, or at least it should. Okay, so I'll post that here, and then let's come back and do a little preset deconstruction. Let's do a preset deconstruction. This is a great way to learn any synthesizer. I love doing this, and literally this is how I learned all this stuff, is by doing this over and over. So let's go to Instruments, Analog, open this up so we see all our presets, and all I'm looking for is, I don't want to look at a rack, so you can see by the icon, this is an analog preset because it's got this icon and we're in the analog folder. This one is a rack, an instrument rack. We'll talk about instrument racks shortly, but I don't want to go there quite yet. So I just want one that doesn't have this line in the middle. So like this. And I'm just going to find like a random one. Okay, let's check that one out. So I'm going to drag this one over onto here. And let's take a look. Okay, so here's what it sounds like. Interesting. Okay, so oscillators. We have two square waves, and they're both on. We have everything's going to filter 1 completely. The volume is different. It's interesting that they took the oscillator 2's volume down. It's quieter than oscillator 1. That's interesting. We have no LFOs on, so I'm not seeing any LFOs down here. That's just fine. Now, pitch-wise, nothing adjusted here, but down here we're up 7 cents. Now that's really prevalent because we can hear that we're playing like a harmony. The 7 semitones is a fifth, right? So that means that like we're hearing the interval of a fifth in every single note, which is great to know because if I go down here and say like I don't want that sound, like I want this sound, but I don't want to hear that harmony, just take this back down to 0, and now we don't have it. Or I could change it to a fourth, or something else. Let's go back to where it was. Okay, cool. And then let's see what its filter is doing. Its filter has just kind of a wide open envelope, pretty low, no resonance. So not doing a lot in the filter, pretty simple. Amplifier, see, this is really interesting. The envelope they've used here, very fast attack, but not instant. It's like ramping up, but really quick, just but instantly off, like no release at all, just shutting off as soon as we stop. No LFO, a little bit of glide. That's interesting. That means that if I play a note and then another note before releasing that first note and the notes overlap, it's going to glide up to that note a little bit. So there's just like a little bit of glide there. That's cool. That's a cool trick. So a really quite simple patch, but a cool sound. So the thing that I like about these preset deconstructions, I like to call them, is that I could look at, something like this semitone thing, and if I didn't know what that was, I can just play some notes and then turn that dial, right? And listen and see if you can figure out what it's doing. So this is just a great way to explore any synth. Load up some of its presets and then pick a dial, listen to it, and start turning that dial and see how it changes it. That'll tell you a lot about what it's doing. Okay, I did kind of skip over this noise thing, so let's go back to this noise and just talk about that real quick, and then we're going to move on to another instrument. Okay, I said a few times that in the analog synth we have 2 oscillators and kind of a third. You could actually make an argument for kind of 4 or maybe even kind of 5. And here's what that means. We have these 2 oscillators. These are 2 that we can hear. Here's our kind of 3, and it's noise. We can hear that. We will hear it. The kind of 4 and kind of 5 would be our LFO. Those are oscillators. We can't hear them though. So not really. But let's go back to noise. Why would we have noise? noise is exactly what it sounds like it is. If I turn off the oscillators and just turn on noise, but noise run through a filter, you can actually do a lot of stuff with. You can add noise to a synth. Like if we take this sound and add noise to it, it changes the sound of it quite a bit, right? So there's a lot of reasons that we might use noise on something. Another good one would be just for percussive elements. If I take this off, take this, and I go like that. Okay. Now I've got like a percussive element. If I put that into my sound, right, now it helps with that percussiveness. So noise can be really useful. We actually also have noise here in this shape. It's just kind of a cool sound. So it's a useful thing, and you will see it in a lot of synthesizers to have noise as an option, either as a separate oscillator or as a wave shape in the oscillator section, or both, as is the case here. So it can be fun to add noise, especially for percussive elements, but sometimes just for timbre, making a unique sound. We can change the color. This is basically a filter. Let's go back to here. Right, so this is basically a low pass filter, but it does help change the sound a lot. All right, let's move on to operator, where we are definitely going to see the option to use noise.